The text that I was never supposed to see and how it impacted my life. Sarah and I met during our last year of college. She was studying marketing, and I was deep into my engineering program. We were introduced at a mutual friend's party, and from the moment we started talking, there was an undeniable connection. She was vibrant, full of life, and had this infectious energy that drew people to her. I, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved, but she seemed to find that intriguing. We balanced each other out perfectly, or at least that's what I thought. We married 3 years after graduation. We had a small, intimate wedding surrounded by close friends and family. I still remember the way she looked walking down the aisle, radiant, with that same energy that had captivated me from the start. Our honeymoon was a simple trip to the mountains, where we spent days hiking, talking about our future, and planning the life we would build together. We had 2 kids over the next few years, a boy and a girl, who became the center of our world. Sarah decided to return to work part-time after our daughter was born, while I continued working full-time. We had a pretty good routine, balancing our careers and family life as best as we could. It wasn't always easy, but we managed, and for the most part, we were happy. At least, that's what I thought. As the years went on, we settled into the rhythm of life. Between work, taking care of the kids, and trying to find a few moments for ourselves, it was easy to let some things slide. We stopped having date nights as often, and our conversations, once filled with excitement and dreams, began to revolve more around the mundane details of daily life, school schedules, work deadlines, grocery lists. It's not that we weren't close anymore, it's just that we had settled into a routine, one that didn't always leave much room for romance. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the signs earlier. There were small things, moments when Sarah seemed distant, or times when she would mention work and then quickly change the subject. I always brushed it off, telling myself that she was just busy or stressed. After all, we had been through so much together, and I trusted her completely. But all of that changed on that Friday evening. It started like any other Friday. We had dinner with the kids, then put them to bed, looking forward to a quiet evening together. Sarah said she wanted to take a quick shower before we settled in to watch a movie, so I stayed in the kitchen to clean up. That's when I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have paid it any attention, but something made me glance at the screen. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was just pure curiosity. What I saw made my heart stop. A message from someone named Matt popped up on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, beautiful." I froze, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just read. Matt was someone Sarah had mentioned before, a colleague at work. She had talked about him a few times, always in the context of work projects or office gossip. I never thought much of it, but now, seeing this message, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just a harmless message, a joke between coworkers. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The tone of the message, the familiarity in his words, it all felt wrong. Before I could stop myself, I picked up her phone and unlocked it. My hands were shaking as I navigated to the message thread with Matt. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Their conversation went back months. What started as casual exchanges about work had slowly evolved into something much more intimate. There were flirtatious comments, inside jokes, and plans to meet up outside of work. The messages were full of warmth and familiarity, the kind that should have been reserved for us. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I read through their exchanges, each message another blow to the life I thought we had. The most recent messages were the hardest to read. Matt had asked if she was still on for Saturday, and Sarah had replied that she couldn't wait to see him. They were planning to spend the day together, the same day she had told me she'd be working late on a project at the office. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. She had lied to me, to our children, and for what? To sneak around with a coworker? The sound of the shower turning off snapped me out of my daze. I quickly locked her phone and put it back on the counter, trying to compose myself before she came out of the bathroom. When she walked into the kitchen, toweling off her hair, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong. That smile, the one I had fallen in love with all those years ago, now felt like a mask, hiding the truth of what she had been doing behind my back. I forced myself to smile back, to pretend that everything was normal, but inside, I was screaming. How long had this been going on? Was it just emotional, or had it turned physical? My mind was flooded with questions, but I couldn't bring myself to ask them. Not yet. I needed time to process what I had just discovered. That night, we sat on the couch and watched the movie we had planned, but I didn't see any of it. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the messages over and over, trying to figure out what had gone wrong in our marriage. I kept glancing at Sarah, who seemed completely unaware of the turmoil raging inside me. How could she act so normal, so loving, when she was betraying me like this? I hardly slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages, heard Matt's words in my head. I thought about all the times Sarah had told me she was working late, or had a last-minute meeting, or needed to go on a work trip. Had she been lying to me all along? Had there been other Matts before him? The doubts gnawed at me, leaving me restless and angry. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still reeling from the discovery. Sarah was still asleep, her phone on the nightstand beside her. I stared at it, tempted to pick it up and go through it again, to find more evidence of her betrayal. But I knew that wouldn't help. I had already seen enough. What I needed now was to confront her, to hear her side of the story, no matter how much it might hurt. When she finally woke up, I asked her to sit down with me in the living room. The kids were still asleep, so we had some time alone. She looked at me, confused, and asked what was wrong. My heart was pounding in my chest as I tried to find the words to tell her what I had seen. Last night, I began, my voice shaky, I saw a message on your phone from Matt. Her face went pale, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she just stared at me, wide-eyed, as if waiting for the ground to swallow her whole. I read the messages, I continued, my voice growing stronger as the anger built up inside me. I know what's been going on between you two. The flirting, the plans to meet up. The lies. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she began to cry, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. She tried to speak, but the words were choked by her tears. Finally, she managed to say, "I'm so sorry." I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her feel the pain she had caused me. But all I could do was sit there, numb, as she poured out her confession. She told me that it had started a few months ago. At first, it was just friendly banter, something to pass the time during the workday. But over time, their conversations had become more personal, more intimate. She admitted that she had started to develop feelings for Matt, feelings she hadn't expected or wanted. She swore to me that nothing physical had happened, that it had only ever been emotional, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, and I love our family. But somewhere along the way, I felt like we lost something. Like we were just going through the motions, and I don't know, I guess I was looking for something to fill that void." Her words stung, but they also made me realize that I wasn't entirely blameless in this. Over the years, I had let the spark between us fade, too. I had gotten comfortable, complacent, and had stopped putting in the effort to keep our marriage alive. But that didn't excuse what she had done. It didn't erase the betrayal I felt. We spent hours talking that morning, going over everything, our marriage, our family, our future. She begged me to forgive her, to give her a chance to make things right. She said she would cut off all contact with Matt, that she would do anything to rebuild the trust between us. But I wasn't sure if that was possible. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Sarah and I tried to navigate the rocky waters of our broken trust. Every time I looked at her, I felt a mix of love and pain, memories of our life together intertwined with the fresh wound of her betrayal. I could see that she was genuinely remorseful, doing everything she could to make amends. She deleted Matt's contact information, switched departments at work to avoid him, and even offered to let me check her phone whenever I wanted. But despite her efforts, the damage had been done. Trust is a fragile thing. It's built over years, but it can be shattered in an instant. And once it's broken, it's not something you can easily glue back together. Even though Sarah was doing everything right, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I found myself second-guessing everything, every time she was late coming home from work, every time she got a text message, every time she smiled at me. I knew it wasn't fair to her, but I couldn't help it. The trust we once had was gone, replaced by suspicion and doubt. We decided to see a therapist, hoping that counseling might help us rebuild what had been lost. Our therapist, Dr. Patel, was a kind, soft-spoken woman who listened carefully to our story. She helped us explore the roots of our problems, both the ones that led to Sarah's emotional affair and the underlying issues that had been festering in our marriage long before Matt came into the picture. In our sessions, Sarah admitted that she had felt lonely for a long time. She missed the connection we used to have, the way we would talk for hours about everything and nothing. But as the years went on, life got in the way. We were both busy with work, with the kids, with the endless responsibilities that come with adulthood. Somewhere along the line, we had stopped prioritizing each other. And in that void, she found herself drawn to the attention and excitement of someone new. Hearing this was hard. It made me feel like a failure as a husband, like I hadn't been enough for her. But it also forced me to confront my own shortcomings. I had taken Sarah for granted, assuming that our marriage was strong enough to withstand the neglect. I had let our relationship fall into a rut, and in doing so, I had unwittingly pushed her away. But even with this understanding, the road to recovery was steep and uncertain. Some days, I felt hopeful, like we might actually be able to move past this and come out stronger on the other side. Other days, the anger and resentment would bubble up inside me, making me question if it was even worth trying. I knew that Sarah was committed to making things right, but I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her, or if I even wanted to. Then there were the kids. They were too young to understand what was going on, but they could sense that something was wrong. Our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become tense and quiet. I hated the thought of them growing up in a household where their parents were just going through the motions, staying together out of obligation rather than love. But the idea of breaking up our family was just as painful. As the weeks turned into months, we continued with therapy, both together and individually. Sarah threw herself into repairing our relationship, planning date nights, writing me heartfelt letters, and even finding a couples retreat that we attended over a long weekend. These things helped, but they couldn't erase the hurt. The wound was too deep, the trust too fragile. One day, after a particularly difficult session with Dr. Patel, I found myself driving aimlessly around the city. I needed space, time to think about what I truly wanted. I pulled over at a park, the same park where Sarah and I had spent countless afternoons before we had kids, before life got so complicated. Sitting on a bench, I watched as families played on the grass, couples walked hand in hand, and kids ran around with carefree laughter. It reminded me of the life Sarah and I had once dreamed of, the future we had envisioned together. I realized that I was at a crossroads. I could continue trying to rebuild our marriage, hoping that with enough time and effort, we could find our way back to each other. Or I could walk away, start over, and try to find happiness on my own. Neither option felt easy or clear-cut. That night, I came home late. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up at me with a mixture of hope and fear, as if she was bracing herself for whatever I was about to say. I sat down next to her, taking her hand in mine. It was the first time in weeks that I had touched her without feeling a pang of hurt. "Sarah," I began, my voice steady but soft, "I don't know where this road is going to take us. But I do know that I'm willing to try. I want to try." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope. We held each other for a long time, neither of us saying a word, just holding on to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to the love we once had. The days that followed weren't easy. We had setbacks, arguments, moments where the pain resurfaced and threatened to tear us apart again. But we also had moments of connection, of rebuilding that trust one step at a time. We started to communicate more openly, to be more present with each other, and to find small ways to show love and appreciation. It wasn't a miraculous recovery, but it was progress. Slowly, the tension in our home began to lift. The kids seemed happier, and so did we. There were still days when the past would haunt us, but they became fewer and farther between. We were learning to forgive, not just each other, but ourselves. 6 months later, as we sat in our final session with Dr. Patel, I realized just how far we had come. Our marriage wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was real, and it was worth fighting for. We had faced our darkest moments and come out the other side, not unscathed, but stronger and more resilient. As we walked out of the therapist's office that day, Sarah squeezed my hand, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I knew that our journey wasn't over, that there would still be challenges ahead. But I also knew that we had made it this far, and that we could face whatever came next together. And as we walked to the car, hand in hand, I realized something important. Love isn't about perfection or never making mistakes. It's about choosing each other, even when things get tough. It's about forgiveness, understanding, and the willingness to keep trying, day after day. That night, as we tucked our kids into bed, I felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. We had been through the fire, but we had come out stronger on the other side. And for the first time in months, I believed that our marriage could survive. That we could not just survive, but thrive. Because in the end, it wasn't the betrayal that defined us, it was the choice to keep going, to keep fighting for the life and the love we had built together. And that was something worth holding on to.